Today, we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am filling in for Kirby today, hosting the Millennial Roundtable of Point of View session. We've got in studio today, we've got Chelsey Youman for First Liberty Institute is with us today, as well as Brent Taylor, who is the pastor of First Baptist Carrollton, Texas, the church at the Fields. And we have got quite a show for you. Today is November 8th, which also just happens to be the very day in 1960 that John F. Kennedy won the presidency. This is the 1-year anniversary that Donald Trump won the presidency. And today we're going to be talking about what happened yesterday. Was yesterday's vote yesterday in Virginia, New Jersey, and et cetera, was that a repudiation of Republican politics? Was that more along the lines of just a vote against Donald Trump? Or was this just a burgeoning movement within Democrats that they're tired of losing, that they're going to be winning now? We'll be talking about that, as well as this. There are millennials that are moving right now. Millennials have largely been characterized as individuals that have been part of the base of the liberal movement. Are they moving to the right now? Or is millennials want socialism? Continuing statistics show that millennials are gravitating towards socialism. Is that bad? Is that good? We'll be talking about that, as well as the tragedy in Texas, as we continue to see more and more information come from that. And so we've got a full show for you today, and we'd love for you to join us. And you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. So let's open it up today. Chelsey, so much happened yesterday relative to electoral politics. And so just to give our listeners kind of just an update on what happened on some of the final poll numbers, Ralph Northam ended up winning the Virginia governor race. Ralph Northam was the lieutenant governor. He was the Democratic candidate. Polls had him only up by 2 points coming into yesterday, but he's now the projected winner, which it looks like he's going to win by 8 to 9 points, 9 if you round up, as well as the lieutenant governor. It seemed as though it was just a sweep for Democrats yesterday.
It seems that way, but at the same time, I don't think they've quite gained momentum in all of the swing states. I'm reading an article actually at a Washington Post that says Democrats still are in rough shape, that they have to win the governor's mansion to be able to really block or push through the right kinds of legislation that they want. And so I'm still hopeful. They did win one seat out in the House, but they've got 6 left to go. So I think they're doing all right, and it's typical of the off year after presidential election for the party in the majority and the party in power to lose a few seats. So I'm not sweating about it yet.
Yeah, Brent, I think there's a lot of contributing factors to what happened yesterday. I mean, you have one, it's an off-year election, which traditionally the incumbent or traditionally the party in power doesn't fare as well. You've got certain intensity that's been brooding. I mean, you have the favorability rating of President Trump right now is at 33% among the general populace. And so there's just that intensity against him, as well as just this frustration, as well as Congress just isn't passing anything. I think it's wrong for us to put all the blame, quote unquote, the blame on President Trump, when 73% of those that were exit polled out of Virginia said that health care was one of the biggest reasons why. Is this more of a legislative pushback against a kind of our Congress? Is this more of just a repudiation against Trump? Is this just the intensity of Democrats? What are we to make of this?
Well, I think that's kind of hard to figure out right now, because we live in such an age of overreaction. Everybody has to swing very far one direction or very far the other direction. And I think that it's a mixed bag. Obviously, I do think that there are some people distancing themselves from Trump and his agenda. I think there are others who are responding to what's going on in their state. And so it's difficult to say right now exactly what's going to happen. I think we have to have time to figure that out.
Yeah. So again, there was other races that were happening as well that were on the national radar. You've got the New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio, that ended up winning by a significant margin, over almost 40%, 39% that he won, which wasn't a big shock to anyone. Then you've got the New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy ended up winning by 13 points, which again wasn't necessarily that big a shock. And those states are pretty much solidified, I guess you could say, from a national electoral map. But really, when you see Virginia, which is this purple state, it really was a stinging defeat for Republicans, right?
It really was. It really was. You know what I'll be interested in seeing, this is more on a macro level than more specific, is how the economy boost is going to really shape things up over the next few years, because Trump is just getting started. He's been in office 11 months now. Yeah. And our economy is hit. The Dow records have been hit time and time again. And he's going to have tax reform, hopefully, in the near future. So I do think that when the economy, if it does really get a good boost, and people have the time to really reflect on that and to feel the impact of that, I think Republicans might be looking at an upswing, hopefully.
Yeah, I wonder about this because Ed Gillespie was the Republican candidate in Virginia, and so there was just a lot that was made that he was running on Trumpism. This understanding that President Trump wasn't going to actually come and campaign with him there, but that Ed Gillespie was going to transition from being kind of an establishment figure to an individual that embodied a lot of the Trump ideals and values. And so there was that distancing that he found himself right in the middle. He wasn't going to have President Trump shadowing him during the time, but he also was just going to fall in line with some of his beliefs. And what that was continued to be perpetuated moving in. But now what we saw is he just got shellacked. I mean, he just got beat by 9 points, Brent. It wasn't the 2-point margin that we saw with the polls, but it was a 9-point beating.
Well, and though they didn't campaign together, there definitely is a tie that people are going to place. And if you are a Republican that's running, unless you just out and out say, I want nothing to do with the sitting president, you're going to get lumped into that category. And so I think that's not surprising, and it's not surprising that people are going to react. Obviously, the president has very strong opinions, very strong views. He voices those on a frequent basis, and so people are going to identify with them, or they're going to reject those. And so I think we see that in elections like this, that people are making statements, making their point. I don't know if the effect of having some of the comments that were made in recent weeks related to not only the election, but with what happened with the former presidents Bush and their comments. I don't know how that played into the election. Obviously, President Trump said that Gillespie didn't tie himself close enough to the ideals, and so it's something it's a tricky situation right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because again, he's the first president since Nixon that didn't actually actively campaign on the trail within the Virginia governorship. So you have to go all the way back to Nixon to find a president that actually wasn't actively involved in this particular race. And what I continue to find so interesting is there's just such a fine line to be able to walk, and then we have to even ask: is there even going to be a line to walk? Because you have a Jeff Flake and you have a Bob Corker, who's the senator from Tennessee as well as from Arizona. When they go out and they're just very much critical and vocal towards that criticism, it doesn't bode well for them. So, is there going to be a line for the walk, or is it going to kind of be similar to 2008 to 2016, where you have President Obama that really builds up his personality but doesn't necessarily care for the base?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Republicans in the state of Virginia are not the same as Republicans in the Midwest. So we have a lot, as we talk about all the time on this show, just the sheer volume of primary candidates we have to choose from goes to show how dynamic and diverse our party really is on the issues. And so I don't think it's okay to say that just because he branded himself like Trump, he should have gained some momentum in Virginia, where you really have an establishment brand of Republicans.
That's so good. We're going to continue to talk about this. You can call in at 800-351-1212. We'd love to hear from you, and we will be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Thomas Sowell recently wrote about what he thinks is the dumbest idea in politics. Now, when you're talking about politics and public policy, there are lots of dumb ideas, but this one might be at the top of the list. He thinks that the most stupid idea that you can find in politics is the assumption that people would be evenly or randomly distributed in incomes, institutions, occupations, or awards. He argues that this assumption is the basis for so many political crusades and personal careers as grievance mongers. What set him off were a number of articles that have appeared recently about the fact that females are underrepresented among the highest-rated chess players and how women and minorities are underrepresented in high-tech jobs in Silicon Valley. Are girls who want to play chess finding doors slammed in their face? Are women and minorities who want degrees in computer science being prevented from pursuing that career? There's no evidence of that. When you get into racial and ethnic differences, this is where the false assumption in the grievance industry really shows up. Differences in outcomes are just naturally assumed to be due to racism or discrimination of some type, but Thomas Sowell points out that something as simple as age differences might explain the different economic circumstances. For example, if every 20-year-old Puerto Rican in America had an identical income of every Japanese American and identical incomes at every other age, the Japanese Americans as a group would still have a higher average income than Puerto Ricans in the United States. Why? Well, the median age of Japanese Americans is more than 20 years older. They have more work experience, so they have higher incomes. Perhaps you can see why Thomas Sowell thinks this assumption about equality is a dumb idea. When you factor in relevant criteria and also recognize that people have different gifts and talents, you begin finding reasons why there are economic differences in society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View for this Wednesday, November 8th, 2017 day. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of First Liberty Institute, as well as Dr. Brent Taylor of First Baptist Church, Carrollton, Texas, and Church at the Fields. And we've been talking about in the first segment the elections that happened yesterday, specifically in Virginia and New Jersey, and we're going to continue talking about that, but we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to call in, that number's 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Was that election a repudiation against President Trump? Was it more of an intensity within the Democratic Party? We'd love to hear from you relative to that. But Chelsey, is this going to be a foreshadowing of things to come in 2018? Are the Democrats going to be able to carry the momentum forward to really just be able to take back a lot of what they've lost over the past 10 years?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but if we look a year ago now, none of us would have imagined the states that Trump pulled off. I mean, this time last year, today, Hillary Clinton thought she was going to be our president. And so I really don't think it's fair to just make a wholesale prediction, but I do think our economy is going to be very telling. Seeing the House won 4 out of 4 seats. They maintained, their majority. So I don't want to overstate the Democrat shift from yesterday, but I do think, depending on how Obamacare shakes out, the repeal of that goes, and tax reform, if really we can make some momentum in our economy, I think we'll be sitting good.
The economy always seems to be the driver, and I think listeners have to be careful because the media is going to act like things have never happened before. This is the first time we've ever had a off-year election when the opposition party took seats. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. You have to filter all of this. This happens on a regular basis. This is not uncommon, and we shouldn't act like the sky is falling.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. Again, historically, what we said. So I think Winston Churchill is right in this instance, where the further we look back into the past, the more clearly we're going to see into the future. And historically, what we continue to see is that, again, the party in power typically does not do well in off-year elections. And lo and behold, they did not do well in off-year elections. Now, Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, getting reelected was not a big surprise to anyone. The New Jersey governor, Phil Murphy, was not a big surprise to anyone. He was up by double digits kind of going into the polls. And so it will be interesting. But just to give you a reminder of what lays ahead for Republicans in 2018, there are 24 seats that Democrats will have to flip in order to gain control of the House. There are 10 Senate seats. That's 10 Senate seats that they are going to have to take from states that Donald Trump won. So they've got a tall feat that lays ahead of them if Democrats want to take control. But again, I think this does show us to a certain degree. I think I'm going to be very interested to see if it's going to be similar to 2018 and 2012, where the Democratic Party was able not necessarily to win, but Barack Obama was able to win. The cult personality of Obama really did, or former President Obama, really did have an effect to be able to generate him, but he wasn't the tide that raised the boat that was the Democratic Party.
That's such a good point that you make. The Democrats really need a leader, and they need someone. The DNC is in shambles. We all know that there's story after story coming out of the corruption and how deep-seated that was with Hillary's funds. And we know that Democrats are done with the Clintons, but they don't have anyone to really replace them as a cohesive leader. And so just as a Republican speaking, I really hope that continues.
Yeah.
Well, and that's I think Terry McAuliffe is going to probably gain some air from last night and probably try to assert himself in that position. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, so we're going to continue taking your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. We're going to take our first call now. We've got Alex from Alex. Are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Alex, what would you like to share?
Hi, hello. Hey, listen, I have to make a comment in regards to these people that are running, be it for the governor or a senator. We have to support the president. Starts there. The numbers that Trump are going through, it's not correct. There are millions of people who support him. And we will support those who will support our president. Period. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, I think there is a great, and I guess you can even, I know that you can make a biblical argument that we need to be able to respect our president. It's very clear you can go all the way from 1 Timothy 2, where it's going to say that we need to pray for those that are in authority. You can go 1 Peter 2, that even says to honor the authority and the kings and the rulers of this particular age. And even I'm always reminded, Brent, especially when you read Romans 13, it appears as though in those first two verses of Romans 13 that it's saying that God has appointed these individuals as ministers to be able to lead us to such an extent that they can enact justice and bring about peace in the area.
Well, and God's sovereignty doesn't just limit itself to our discussions on Sunday morning when we're at church. I mean, God is in control of all things, and people find comfort in that when their party is not in office. And people find a reason to stand up and speak out when their party is in office. And I think that as believers, as Christians, we ultimately recognize that this kingdom that we have here on earth is not our home, that there is an eternal kingdom, and that the Lord is in control. And it is our responsibility as believers to pray, to support, to represent Christ in this culture. And I think that an important way to do that is to pray for our president, to pray for those in leadership, and it doesn't matter what party they represent, we pray.
Yeah.
And that's what Christians are called to do.
Yeah, and Chelsey, that brings up another great point that I keep on thinking about. It's almost the over-politicalization of our culture, that we just expect politics to be in everything and to be the end-all to everything. But from a conservative standpoint, I feel as though Edmund Burke would be rolling over in his grave right now, because you have this understanding that there are political things, yes, but there are permanent things. There are the things like family. There are the things like your church. There are other civic organizations that you're a part of. And from a conservative standpoint, you believe in limited government because you believe in the propensity and the specialty of people to be able to solve some of these problems that all too often are being solved by government, right?
Well, and beyond that, talking philosophically, it's not the role of politics or a leader to be God or a moral compass, which goes to exactly what you're saying. I think with the rise of nihilism and the decrease, frankly, in Christianity across our country and the religiosity of our country, we're seeing our politicians replace those moral arbitrators in our life, and they're going to disappoint. I mean, we cannot expect an elected official or the government, frankly, to be our charity and our hope and our help, and as I mentioned earlier, our moral compass. So that's definitely the direction we're going. But it's interesting to see we're in kind of a what I call a post ideology realm, where our elected official isn't necessarily a pure conservative, and he's not by Republican standards necessarily good Republican. But he is our elected official.
Yeah, I think Mike Pence always makes a really great point on this, and then also Ben Sasse has done this as well. He said that it's an identity game, and so for us, it's just placing our identities in the right priority. And so Pence as well as Sasse would say, my first priority and my first identity is that of a Christian. What Paul says in Philippians 3:20, that I have a citizenship of this kingdom. I'm a child of God. And then from that, then you're able to say I'm an American. Before I'm a political party, I am an American there. And then from Christian 1, American 2, and then you transition into your political party, which is really interesting because this is where Sasse and, again, Pence would disagree, is some would say that I'm a conservative first before I'm a Republican, because to be a conservative and a Republican isn't necessarily the same thing in today's age. Does that sound about right?
I think so, and I think that one of the things as believers we have to hold very dear to us is that first calling of being a Christian, of being a Christ follower, because I see so often, you see on social media, people are posting things, saying things that contradict what they say on Sunday when they're in their church and their place of worship. And I think that we need to speak clearly. I think we need to speak boldly. I think we need to speak with conviction in our heart, but we also need to speak with kindness, with charity, with love, with grace. And so oftentimes I think Christians, they tend to identify party first and, I'm a Christian on Sunday as well. That is detrimental to our society, and that is not going to advance the kingdom. We've got to be much more bold in our faith and let our faith drive our politics.
Yeah, that is so good. That is so good. And we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. We'd love to hear what your response is to the elections of yesterday or to this understanding of the over-politicalization of our culture. Do Christians need to be leading the efforts to decharge some of these conversations to establish, first and foremost, that I am a Christian one? Brent, you bring up a really great topic. I was reading a study the other day out of Lifeway Research, and they were polling Christians, and they said only 9% of Christians saw the Bible as influential relative to their understanding of immigration. Well, we can disagree on immigration, but I think we can all agree as Christians that we believe the Bible to be authoritative. We believe the Bible from Psalm 119 to be a lamp unto our feet and a guide to our path. In the Bible, what Peter would say, gives us everything pertaining to life and godliness, and it does need to be something that is influential in the way that we're forming our opinions. It's supposed to shape us. Hence the reason why the writer of Hebrews would say it's like a double-edged sword that can cut, but it also points to the great healer. And so it's increasingly important for Christians to be Christians, one, and then to be Americans, two. And we'll be back right after this.
You're riding down the road, and just ahead you see an elderly woman tumble off the curb into the street. As your friend drives past, she prays, "Lord, please send someone to help that poor woman," and drives on. What if that was your mother or grandmother? In Christ, our family includes people like Sarah. Sarah was 95 years old, and she didn't tumble into a street. She was forced into it because ISIS was coming. Countless Christians like Sarah are suffering in the Middle East, the birthplace, the cradle of Christianity, and we refuse to pass on by. We urge you to stop with us for just a moment and lend a helping hand to persecuted Christians through the Cradle Fund. Visit pointofview.net/Cradle Fund or call 1-800-347-5151. Our Middle Eastern family needs us. Stop and give right now. Pointofview.net/Cradle Fund and 800-347-5151. Or mail a check with Cradle Fund in the memo to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Welcome back to Point of View, Wednesday, November 8th, 2017 day. This is the day after the elections. And so we have been talking about the elections, everything from what happened in Virginia to Ed Gillespie losing by upwards of 9 points to the 14-point win for the New Jersey governor to just the change in guard that's happening in Virginia right now at the state level as well. And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And we're going to take one of those phone calls now. We've got Lance in Texas. Lance, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Hey,
I would just like to say, how are you doing? Yes, I would just like to say that I think this is more in Virginia a slap to the establishment Republican Party, not Trump. I think this is a wake-up call for the Republican Party around the nation that they need to elect in the primaries people that are Republicans that are against the establishment, because many times the establishment Republicans are just the same as the Democrats, and that's why Republicans sit at home and don't vote, because they feel like they're voting for a Democrat when they vote for a Republican who's established. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, Lance, you bring up a really great point. And Chelsey, I think this was one of the bigger indictments coming into it relative to Gillespie. So Gillespie was, quote unquote, and I'm always interested to what is an establishment figure. I think it just,
well, now we just know it's a bad word.
Yeah,
so I think that's about it.
But nevertheless, I think there's a lot of definitions. But I think Gillespie would definitely be someone that was formerly establishment. I guess you would say he was an individual that served in the Bush White House. He was an individual that served the Republican Party at the party convention. Was someone that was solidified and had been in office or had been in the administration for quite a while. And it seemed as though he was veering away from that, or at least the way that he was kind of campaigning along the lines. But really, and again, 2 points is what the poll numbers, a lot of the poll numbers continue to say he was down by coming into the very last day of the election, and then he ends up losing by 9 points. Was this a slap against the establishment space, or was this just a really the intensity of the Democrats really just kind of came out?
I think it's all about how you frame it. I mean, political predictions are. But it is interesting. He does make a good point, because Trump actually came out with a tweet. I don't know if you read this about Gillespie, essentially disclaiming Gillespie as one of his own. He said he did not run on my platforms. He did not run on my ideas. Very much came out, frankly, just kicking Gillespie while he was down. But it does seem that Gillespie did run on anti-immigration, and he did run on some Trump platforms. So they're both Trump is trying to make some separation there. Meanwhile, Gillespie seemed to have been trying to ride more on the Trump coattail. So it's hard to say.
Well, Gillespie was trying to walk a line, and I think a lot of Republicans are going to be walking that line in 2018 of trying to side with the president on some issues, like he did like Gillespie did on immigration, and yet there were other issues where he wasn't as tied into the president. And there's a bit of a mindset in life that you're either all with me or you're against me, and that tightrope is going to be increasingly difficult to walk for people in 2018.
Okay, so just to give some context here, so President Trump, the morning of the 7th, so yesterday morning, he tweeted, quote, this is 3 tweets that I'll quote, Ralph Northam will allow crime to be rampant in Virginia. He's weak on crime, weak on our great veterans, anti-Second Amendment, and it's been horrible on the Virginia economy. Vote Ed Gillespie today. Ed Gillespie will totally turn around the high crime and poor economic performance of Virginia, and crime will be gone. Vote today, ASAP. And then the quote Chelsey was referencing earlier today. Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before. It's almost like this
even bigger.
Bigly.
And so it really is. It's very interesting how he came out, and obviously you want your president to be able to support. He's the leader of the particular party, and so he was supporting that individual. He was supporting his party by supporting his party's candidate. And then afterwards, he kind of gives that sting that, well, Ed Gillespie never was really with me. He wasn't necessarily someone that was alongside of me, which I think is going to be very interesting, because I think if we go back to 2016, we need to recognize that, again, President Trump lost Virginia that time. He lost Virginia. He had about 44% of the electoral vote. I think it was like 44.6 or something like that. Well, Ed Gillespie actually had a greater percentage in this. He had like 45 point something percent. If now, again, it's very small, but it does show that Ed Gillespie did better relative to in the percentage-wise than Donald Trump.
That's right. I mean, one size not fit all for Republican Party. Yep. And if I had one thing I could tell every Republican in the entire world, it would be this. We have to stand united or we lose, period. Vote, come out in droves and vote for your Republican candidates because Democrats are going to take your seats if you don't. They're organized. They come out, maybe a little bit less principled. So they just vote for whoever's on the ticket. And the reason Gillespie lost is because those who are anti-establishment did not come out and support him. And now you have a Democrat in charge.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I think you bring up a really great point because Republicans have always had a variety of flavors. So they're like ice cream. And so if we go back, so Brent, I know that you were out at the Nixon, or not Nixon, but you were out at the Reagan Museum a few months ago. And so you go back to Reagan and think about it from back in 1980, the original "Make America Great Again" guy, that he had that as his campaign slogan. So Reagan very much would have been considered a very hardcore conservative. He was very adamant in his conservative beliefs, and he was very he was very hesitant to bring on George H.W. Bush because George H.W. Bush would have been considered a moderate. But for the sake of unity for the party and for the sake of actually getting elected and not just taking a stand and not having any influence, aka not having an office, he consolidated the party by bringing on H.W. Bush, though he was more moderate in nature. And he ended up getting elected and became one of the best presidents that we've had. Is there a need for that type of unity to happen?
Well, President Reagan, who, by the way, this is an anniversary date for him. He was elected governor of California on this day. But President Reagan had the ability, the charisma to attract people from across the lines, not just within his own party, but they talk about Reagan Democrats and being able to draw people in from that perspective. So he had a broad appeal. Right now, the Republican Party is in an identity crisis. They're trying to figure out who they are, and depending on your particular political view, your identity of what it is and what it's supposed to be and what people need to get on board with can be a little bit different. That's that ice cream variety. It doesn't mean that there has to be uniformity in every single thing, but there does need to say, we do need to say, okay, these are guiding principles that drive our lives, that drive our party. That type of approach needs to be taken.
To speak to what you were saying, I pulled up a map I found earlier this week that 33 years ago, Reagan had every state vote for him except for one. And this is the map. It is all red, and there's one blue state. And you're right. He did speak across party lines. Politics has changed a lot in 33 years. I mean, if we're really thinking about it, the Republicans they're soul searching right now. I don't know that we'll ever be the unified party that we were. And part of that's okay. I mean, we are principled. We are people of principle, which means we've got a lot of diehards, and they're not willing to, get into a gray area on this issue to cross the aisle in order to pass. That's part of the reason I don't think Republicans are passing much right now, because they're not willing to give and take with the other side to get accomplished what they want in a unified way.
And one of the approaches that the Democrats are taking is there is a unified opposition to President Trump, but at the same time, there is also comments that are being made. Northam made comments about being willing to work with the president on some issues. And I think most Americans are wanting progress to be made. They're wanting to move the ball down the field. And so they're trying to figure out how do we accomplish that? And I think that the Democrats will pick up that strategy and will continue that strategy, not saying we're going to adopt all the plans of the president. They're not going to do that at all. But I do think that they might say we're willing to work on these issues, partner on these issues. And the approach of saying, if you don't agree with me on everything, then we cannot be friends, we cannot work together. That's not what President Reagan did, and that's not the approach that he took, and I don't think that's the approach that we can take. Also, you have back when President Reagan was in office, you didn't have social media, and so now everybody's an expert, everybody has an opinion, everybody's able to rally their group in a way that you just didn't do back then. It was much more grassroots, and literally grassroots, in the grass, out there knocking on doors, connecting with people that way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things is you'll continue to see is just this sense of building the coalitions, because I think the American people want that. I mean, I'm just reminded of a couple of months back when President Trump was willing to work with Senator Schumer as well as with Leader Pelosi during that time. There was a spike in his approval ratings that moved him from the 30s to the 40s. People wanted to see him work across the aisle. And again, a part of that is just Democrats that weren't as antagonistic towards President Trump. But then a part of that is just the American people want to see their politicians working together towards the common good, so that we might form a more perfect union. And we think about it from the biblical perspective, too. I mean, Acts 15 is that beautiful example of compromise, that you've got the Peter coalition, you got the Paul coalition that kind of come together, that are willing to make those compromises in order to kind of bring about some type of appeasement and then move forward, recognizing that we're all on the same team. Again, we're all Christians first and we're all Americans second, and we all want to see the flourishment of both. And so how can we do that in a way that's pleasing to both particular parties? And so we'll continue this conversation, but we've got to take one of those commercial breaks. And so we hope you will continue to join us right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and we are at the Millennial Roundtable, and this is Wednesday, November 8th, 2017, and we are continuing to talk about what happened yesterday and then what is happening within the Republican Party. It seems as though we're continuing to see departures that are leaving the House, that are leaving the Senate, and really is opening up this idea of who's actually going to be running. There's just a lot of opportunity that which typically doesn't happen in some of these solid seats. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your point of view. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And Chelsey, I was looking over the list because even yesterday we heard word that there was yet again another individual that was not going to be running for the re-election in the House, and that was Ted Poe of Texas, which is in the Houston area is what he represents. He had been serving for 7 terms, and he is not alone. There are 13 thus far individuals, Republicans specifically, that are not running. Again, if you're in the Texas area, you've got Lamar Smith, who's down in the San Antonio area. He had served 15 terms. You've got an individual, Jeb Henseling. He had 8 terms, and he is not running again. You've got Tim Murphy in Pennsylvania that had served 7 terms. And again, there are 13 individuals that are not running for re-election. And then you've got Bob Corker that's not going to run in the Senate. You've got Jeff Flake that's not going to run in the Senate. Is Mitt Romney going to run in the Senate for Utah? There's a lot of shuffling right now that's happening in the Republican Party, Chelsey.
There is. Some of it is worth noting, and then some of it's not. So we're going to sift through it. But the first statistic I found that is worth noting is that the average terms most of these members serve is about 8 terms over the last 40 years. And most of the Republicans retiring have served 9.3. Oh, wow. And so they really have done their time. A lot of these guys have served multiple terms, and they're getting a little bit more, a little bit old. They're ready to retire. Yeah. But the statistic I do think that I found that's worth noting is that they're retiring at a 12-to-1 ratio with Democrats. So maybe the Democrats have younger members at this time who are going to be there for longer. So it's a really important time to have solid Republican candidates stepping up for those primary races and taking those seats so that we don't lose these seats in 2018. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because, Brent, is this our Republican? Again, I'm going to ask you to kind of be the psychologist in this right now. Mm-hmm. Are Republicans leaving because they're just tired of being in public service? Or is it to a certain extent that it's just really going to be very difficult for them to be able to win election right now? Because, again, we're seeing that there's a fine line that you're having to tread right now as a Republican of wanting, one, to channel to a certain degree President Trump and follow after his leadership of the party. But two, again, if you're a conservative, you wouldn't necessarily say our president is the most conservative individual that's ever held office.
Well, thanks for giving me that question. I really appreciate that. That's a difficult thing because you do have people who are leaving because they have served their time. They've spent quite a bit of time in politics. I think we also have this decline in political civility in our culture that makes it exhausting. It's exhausting as a political watcher to see all the things that are going on. Imagine just being in the middle of all of that. And then I think the action side of things, maybe the breakdown in collegiality that's happened in our society is concerning. There's just this polarization that has become so stark in our culture. And it used to be that polarization was between parties. Mm-hmm. Now that polarization is not only within parties, being, as we talked about in the last segment, but it's breaking down. It's going down into relationships, friendships, families. There's always the joke about, hey, Thanksgiving's coming up, so boy, that's going to be interesting around the political table as people are talking. But it's going into churches, it's going into Christian relationships, friendships, and so I just think people are discouraged in some regards. And if we were making more progress, if more things were actually happening instead of the feeling of just kind of a malaise that's going on, then I think there might be more people staying. Yet attrition is part of life. It's going to happen, so we have to balance our understanding of both.
Any thoughts, Chelsey?
I'm excited. I mean, you can call me crazy, but, primary season is starting, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see how the party changes with Trump in the administration. And the DNC is, as I mentioned earlier, is in shambles right now. And I think it's a chance for the Republicans to really hopefully find some common ground with each other, have some really solid candidates step forward. Most of these guys, some of them have served 13, 15 terms, most of their lives. I think the youngest two to retire and step down have both served 5 terms. And so I don't know what all their specific reasons are for their retirement, but the media has won if the country is really that discouraged. Because let's not forget, a year ago today, the media told us Trump had a better chance of walking on the moon than he did winning that election. And for years, we heard that all of the polls showed he was not going to be in a majority, that Americans weren't supporting him. If you look at the media, they they are not creating an accurate picture of the real dynamic at hand. And I think that holds true today.
Yeah, I think the polls are very distrustworthy. I think part of polling is just trying to have a representative sample of the voting populace that's actually going to be going to the polls. And what we saw all the way back in 2008, that Barack Obama was able to pull out a huge contingent of college voters and youth voters that really wasn't reflected in the polling, hence the reason why he won a little bit more. Donald Trump would be 2016 version, right? So they did not assume that he would be able to pull out as heavily a turnout as some of those constituencies and demographics that he did. And then even last night, we see Ed Gillespie, that he, again, coming into it, he was only down by 2 points, but again, he loses by 9 points. That there is just this encouraging, to a certain degree, individuals that are exercising their freedom and their right to vote. But I think it's increasingly important for us to understand our responsibility, that we have been given this freedom, but this freedom is not free. There are individuals that have sacrificed for us, and in order to show our gratitude, one of the ways that we can do that is by exercising that right as well. And we're going to continue taking your phone calls, and so we've got Dwayne in North Carolina. Dwayne, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, hello there.
Yes, I know. I am a female Dwayne. Anyway, yes, I definitely think that the media has quite an agenda, and if we would quit listening to it, we'd be a lot better off. But I wanted to comment that I really think that some of these, senators and the congressmen on the Republican side that are leaving because, they've been in there forever, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what happens is that these guys and women get to Washington, and they're there forever, and they just get very comfortable being there forever, and they just don't do what they're sent into to do. And I think it's very frustrating, and for our president, they need to get behind him. We have voted him in there. Get behind him and let him do what he needs to do, because that's what the people wanted a year ago, and we still want it. So anyway, that was my comment on that. And let's see, there was something. To be honest, I really think, too, that I think I might go independent. I am a registered Republican, but I am getting very frustrated with them. So I'm thinking I may just register independent and see what happens.
Yeah, Dwayne, you bring up a really great point in this sense that there's a sense that they have served their time, and not necessarily in the negative sense, but they've served their time, and now it's the beautiful opportunity for them to be able to experience the fruit of their labor, right? That they're individuals that have legislated, they're individuals that have really shaped our country to a large degree, and now have the opportunity to be able to go back and to be shaped by the very laws that they shape.
And many of them that are leaving are in their late 60s, early 70s, and if it was in any other industry, people would say, well, of course, it's time to retire, it's time to enjoy life. Politics is no different.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you even see this in the farewell address of George Washington, that he said that he was going to retire off, and so when he retired off, he utilized the proverb that would say, I'm going to enjoy the fruit of the labor. And so it's very interesting times, and so we are going to take a break, and when we get back, we're going to continue talking about politics, as well as millennials as well. So we'll be back right after this.
Affirm Films and Sony Pictures Animation present The Star, the fully animated story of the first Christmas, told through a whole new set of eyes. Bo the donkey and his stable of animal friends follow the star to become some unlikely heroes.
That light, that's the star. This is where it's been leading me. What's his name?
His name is Jesus.
The Star, in theaters November 17th. More information is available at thestarmovie.com.
If you were homeless and on the run, all because you love Jesus, would you want Christians to step up and help? Our family in the Middle East, the cradle of our faith, is in desperate need because of ISIS and other persecutors. Point of View urges you to support the Cradle Fund today to help these precious believers. Please give at pointofview.net/Cradle Fund or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/Cradle Fund and 800-347-5151. Or write Cradle Fund in the memo of your check to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and this is Point of View Radio Talk Show, and this is the Millennial Roundtable, and I'm joined at the roundtable today by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I am good. I'm good on this rainy Wednesday in Dallas.
Rainy Wednesday here in Dallas. And then we're also joined at the Millennial Roundtable by a Gen Xer, and that is the one, the only Brent Taylor. Brent Taylor, pastor of First Baptist Carrollton, Texas, as well as Church of the Fields. Brent, how are you?
Well, it's always an honor to be with the man, the myth, the legend.
Oh, there he is. There he is.
Nick Pitts.
No way. Kirby, as we know, Kirby is not here. So if Kirby is the hamburger, then I am the vegan burger on a gluten-free bun. So that's who you have here today. And we are so excited that you decided to join us. And so if you missed the first hour we kind of overviewed kind of what happened yesterday in the political world. There was an election that happened in a variety of different states, but primarily much of the attention has been given to Virginia and New York and New Jersey. And so Virginia saw a massive sweep of Democrats took to office, and primarily led by Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam, that ended up winning by 9 points. So the polls only had him winning by 2 points. Coming into the day, he ended up winning by 9 points, defeating the once establishment, then kind of the Trump candidate, Ed Gillespie. And then there was the down ballot as well in Virginia, just a sweeping line of victories for Democrats. And that sweeping line of victories extended outside the state as well. So you've got one of the first openly Islam, I think Shiite Muslim, that was elected mayor in Hoboken, New Jersey, as well as the governor of New Jersey will now be a Democrat, replacing Chris Christie. Ended up winning by 14 points, even though polling at 12 points coming into the day, as well as Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City ended up winning by 39 points. So he barely inched out a victory there, Brent. Barely squeaked one by. And so we've been talking about everything from was this election a referendum on President Trump? Was this just revealing the intensity of Democrats? And so we've had quite a bit of conversation relative to that. And we've been taking your phone calls as well, and we'll continue taking your phone calls for here the second hour. And you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to make our way out to California now. So we've got Gilbert in California. Gilbert, are you there?
Yes, sir. Hi. How y'all doing?
Doing well, Gilbert. Doing well. What is your point of view?
Well, here's my thoughts, guys. I live in California, one of the most democratic states in history, I would guess. And there's a number of conservative people in the state that are not represented by the current Democratic establishment. Across the country, our president has a lot of support, more than he's given credit for. So my thoughts are this, is I do believe that there are a number of Republican leaders in office right now who are finding themselves now out of touch with the heartbeat of America. And I believe that there are a number of them, and I can name three: Senator McCain, Rand Paul, and Mitch McConnell, who seemingly are standing in the way of progress for this nation. So in regards to the election in Virginia, I wonder that the people there were, as have been stated before, tired of the establishment and we look at the Capitol, our senators and our House of Representatives, and they're not able to take a stand for what this country needs and make a vote to bring about change. And so why vote for somebody who's just going to get up there and be another mule in the road in the way of progress? Because I believe that's what's going on with these. And I believe there's two more, and I can't remember their names, who are always voting against the progress that the president is wanting to bring about in policy. So that was my thought there. And ending, I'll get off the line after this. I make the statement is here in California, I believe we do have a number of conservative voters who want to see change in this state. But we need help from, and I don't want to represent myself as one side or the other, Republican or Democratic. But in my case, as a conservative Christian, Republicans are going to most likely identify with what I want as a voter and as a citizen in this state. So we need help. We need President Trump or whoever Republican leadership help over here to begin to broadcast our future Republican nominations or nominees for office here in the state. I really believe that if we get the right people up there, we can see change here. It's a really steep uphill battle, but I believe it can be done. Thank you.
Gilbert, you bring up a really great point. Just at the very beginning of your comment, it reminded me of a poll that came out that was in conjunction with the Hill as well as Gallup organization. And California was one of the more Democratic states. In that was Minnesota, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington. As far as Republican states, those were Idaho, Alaska, Kansas, Mississippi, and Alabama was the most Republican state. But Gilbert does bring out a really great point. And what I appreciate about Gilbert, though he was speaking as a conservative Christian, is what he was saying, is there's a great need for our politicians and our elected leaders to be in touch with the needs of the people. I think we can all agree on that, right?
Absolutely. He also expressed a sentiment I think we heard from a caller earlier today, which is, to view that election as a rejection of the establishment. My only response to that would be, where were we on the primary? Mm-hmm. So the primary is the time to have that battle. The primary is the time to elect the Republican you think adheres to your set of values and principles and who will be the best leader for your state. And then the general is not the time to debunk the establishment. The general election is the time to win.
Yeah. That's a great point. And again, it kind of puts this weight in balance, right? Brent, you've got to have this understanding of, are you willing to sacrifice ideological purity for the sake of actually winning the office? Because oftentimes what we're continuing to see is that there has to be ideological purity, but for ideological purity, you might be so far out of touch with the particular needs and constituents of that particular district or that state that you're trying to represent, that it's great to make a stand, but you really can't do anything because you can't be elected.
Well, there's been a lot of frustration over the years. We saw that with the rise of the Tea Party several years ago. There's been a lot of frustration with people in Congress. We've heard a couple of callers who have referenced that, and I think that the feeling of people is they want action, they want things done. The problem is when you become so divided because of that political purity, that ideological purity that you're seeking, it gets really hard to get things done when you have people who have very strong opinions and their definition of what that ideological purity looks like. When you take a strong stand, it's really hard to partner and cooperate. And that's where, if we're going to move the ball, we're going to have to cooperate on some level.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting as both parties try to figure out what are those closed-handed issues, what are those open-handed issues, what are those things that we're willing to compromise on, and what are those things that we are adamant and these are the core principles and the foundational beliefs of our particular ideology and party as well. We'll continue talking about this, as well as the rise of favorability of socialism, of all things, among millennials. And so we'll talk about that right after the break, but we'd also welcome your call. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, and we will be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Thomas Sowell recently wrote about what he thinks is the dumbest idea in politics. Now, when you're talking about politics and public policy, there are lots of dumb ideas, but this one might be at the top of the list. He thinks that the most stupid idea that you can find in politics is the assumption that people would be evenly or randomly distributed in incomes, institutions, occupations, or awards. He argues that this assumption is the basis for so many political crusades and personal careers as grievance mongers. What set him off were a number of articles that have appeared recently about the fact that females are underrepresented among the highest-rated chess players and how women and minorities are underrepresented in high-tech jobs in Silicon Valley. Are girls who want to play chess finding doors slammed in their face? Are women and minorities who want degrees in computer science being prevented from pursuing that career? There's no evidence of that. When you get into racial and ethnic differences, this is where the false assumption in the grievance industry really shows up. Differences in outcomes are just naturally assumed to be due to racism or discrimination of some type, but Thomas Sowell points out that something as simple as age differences might explain the different economic circumstances. For example, if every 20-year-old Puerto Rican in America had an identical income of every Japanese American and identical incomes at every other age, the Japanese Americans as a group would still have a higher average income than Puerto Ricans in the United States. Why? Well, the median age of Japanese Americans is more than 20 years older. They have more work experience, so they have higher incomes. Perhaps you can see why Thomas Sowell thinks this assumption about equality is a dumb idea. When you factor in relevant criteria and also recognize that people have different gifts and talents, you begin finding reasons why there are economic differences in society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. This is Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Brent Taylor, who's at the Church of the Fields in First Baptist Carrollton, Texas. And we've been talking about the election, but we're going to transition from election to more of a millennial issue. And so we thought socialism would have been through when we got kind of out of that Cold War thing, but it appears as though it is on the rise again. And so if you want to go to the Point of View website, you'll be able to see that article. And so you can go to pointofview.net. Again, that URL is pointofview.net. And according to a Harvard University poll conducted last year, 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds in the U.S. said they opposed capitalism. Only 42 expressed support. And among Americans by all ages, you contrast that with a Gallup survey, 60% held positive views of capitalism. It's like millennials largely, or at least rejecting capitalism. What would cause them to reject that? Chelsey, as our resident expert on millennials, tell me why.
Because I am such a good millennial. No, I actually did a deep dive on this topic because I was completely flabbergasted and wanted to make sure I understood exactly what we're talking about when we're using broad terms like socialism and communism, which should raise the hair on the back of every good American. But in my deep dive, I found a Washington Post article from 2016. Okay. I'm a nerd, just let it happen. But it had a really great, I think, a very apt analysis of this. And it discussed, it said, we have to define socialism. And in the mind of millennial, what does that mean? Because it's not necessarily Russia. It's not necessarily Mao China that they're thinking of. It's truly like the Scandinavian form of socialism. So they think of Denmark. And what they're talking about are two predominant government programs. First of which, education. second of which healthcare.
Okay.
And I think their concept, if we're defining socialism to a millennial, is big government programs. You think they're the most student loaned out group of individuals out there. I can attest to that myself as a law school graduate. Many tears over that. So these are groups of people who have seen the healthcare system fail them and the education programs and think, wow, the government paying for that would be really nice. We're going to call that socialism, social programs being paid for by the government. But if you look at other polls where you actually start defining capitalism to them and free markets, they're actually in favor of free markets. So it's an interesting tension there. And then I also found a study that said, as soon as they become tax-paying citizens, these views change because reality check hits. As soon as they start paying for their own health care, all of a sudden they don't want higher premiums. So I think the views will age out, as do most generations when they're younger. They are rebellious against the establishment, tend to lean more liberal, and then they'll shift eventually. They'll age out of it and mature and become good Republicans.
So what are you thinking about this, Brent? Like you've got some millennials, Gen Zers in your household. Like what are they up and coming budding socialists right now?
Are you polling Are you polling them?
Well, in our home, we run a dictatorship, and so that's very clear. And if you want to live in a free society, then go get a job and move out. So that's the world we live in. But there's a part of me, and what you just shared there is I think really gives the texture to it to understand what millennials are thinking when they think about socialism. But there's also a side that to use the old expression, that sometimes we can be so open-minded that our brains fall out. Mm-hmm. And when I see in the media the favorability ratings of people like Lenin and Mao and Stalin, thankfully those have actually dropped a point or two. Mm-hmm. But still, when you have 23% who are favoring Lenin and 22% hold a favorable view of Karl Marx, it just makes your head spin a little bit, because those are failed programs, those are failed societies. Now, granted, that's not exactly what they're looking for. They're not looking for communist Russia necessarily. They're trying to figure out how can someone pay for, how can the government help to provide these needs as I'm, up to my ears in debt, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it in society. But there's also a part of growing up, welcome to reality, where those things that's the world that we live in today, and you have to pay for healthcare. You have to pay for the needs and the desires that you have in your life. And so it's something that millennials are working themselves through.
Yeah, there was a study that was put out by Bloomberg that said when millennials were asked to pick between living in a socialist country and living in a capitalist country, 44% said socialist country, 42% said capitalist country. And I think Chelsey brings up a really great point. I think to the extent that we need to be cognizant of present circumstances as well as past context. And so present circumstances that millennials are graduating with a significant amount of college debt. The average millennial will graduate from college in 2015 if they went to a public university with $25,000 in debt. And that's quite a number for an individual to carry. The average American will have $16,000 in credit card debt, and that's compounding on to how much are they actually saving with that, how much they have the capacity to be able to save with that. And so that kind of debt is almost like just dragging you along. So the idea of sharing, of someone helping me along the way, is very beneficial and advantageous for them. But then we also need to recognize the kind of the brokenness of the system that they lived in their past context, of the extent that they lived and moved in a system in which it just seemed like everything was turned against them. There's an inherent distrust for institutions among millennials, because you need to be reminded that Iraq, they feel as though, was a war that they should not have been brought into, that was lied to be able to bring in. You had the Enrons of the world that were just the crony corruption that was happening within the business context. And then you've got, unfortunately, with the Catholic Church scandal, as well as what we continue to see with Protestant churches as well, just ministers just not failing to live up to the calling that they've received, not living in a manner worthy of the gospel message, is what Paul would say to the Ephesians. And so there's just this inherent distrust. And so the idea of sharing seems a bit more appealing. But in reality, it's not. You're sharing to a certain extent, but more, you're robbing too, right?
Well, I think some of the characteristics that define the millennial generation work for and against these concepts. So this is the generation, you listed off a few, but they also lived through the great recession and 08 and the market crashes, and had Obama for 8 years when they were finally of the age to probably really start paying attention to politics, had a humanist as their president who I think they're the most collective-minded generation, is something I've heard said about them. The good that comes out of that is they're social-minded, they're socially conscious, they understand. I read an article that said they're really understanding the connection of the dots between capitalism, eradicating poverty across the world. So there are some really good connections being made. But at the same time, that works against us if you're talking about bigger government, social programs. And I just think they're going to age out of it when they really come to terms and see that capitalism actually resolves a lot of these disputes.
And what's the stereotypical millennial joke? Well, you got a trophy for everything. You participated, so you got a trophy.
Because I didn't have the talent to actually earn one. Keep on going.
Well, but it wasn't the millennial that said, "Give me the trophy." It was the parent that gave the trophy. And so if you've grown up in a generation where things have been given to you, have been handed to you, then that expectation and the value, hey, this is what I grew up in, this worked for me growing up. Well, it's not about trophies anymore. The trophies change and what the trophies look like. And so I think that that's our culture that we've created. And, we saw last week the video that we talked about last Wednesday, where the tax plan was presented to college students, and it was presented as Bernie Sanders' tax plan, and the students who had just said that they were against anything that President Trump was promoting, they said that they approved that idea. They liked the plan that was being put forth as it related to lowering the tax rate on small business. And yet when these students found out that actually they had been tricked, that it was really President Trump's tax plan that was being presented, all of a sudden, well, now that makes sense. Okay, maybe I do like some of the things that the president is saying. I think there's a collectivist mindset that Chelsey talks about that is a negative that they have toward the sitting government. So they're going to be anti-establishment toward capitalism.
There's a distrust among institutions that is at historical levels right now. And so that many millennials, that maybe there's some that are listening in right now, and we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. There are many millennials that are sitting at their desk right now, and they're sitting at a desk that they've gotten a college education. Many of them have gotten a graduate education, and they're considered underemployed. The number of underemployed, according to Bloomberg as well as Wall Street Journal, that has done some polls, numbers anywhere from 40 to 50%. Not unemployed because they're working, underemployed. So their educational credentials don't match their vocational interest right now. And so they're sitting at a desk recognizing they have talents that have been skilled and honed, but aren't being able to fully utilize those. As what Jesus would say in Luke 14, they're hiding some of their talents in the ground because they haven't been given the ability to be able to place those and plant those in the ground. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how millennials, if they do age out of this, and if they do, how they age out of it. What is it that they're moving towards, not just moving away from? It's one thing to be against something. It's a radically different thing to be for something. We'd love to hear from you. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. We're going to take a break, and we'll continue to talk about socialism and millennials right after this.
You're riding down the road, and just ahead you see an elderly woman tumble off the curb into the street. As your friend drives past, she prays, "Lord, please send someone to help that poor woman," and drives on. What if that was your mother or grandmother? In Christ, our family includes people like Sarah. Sarah was 95 years old, and she didn't tumble into a street. She was forced into it because ISIS was coming. Countless Christians like Sarah are suffering in the Middle East, the birthplace, the cradle of Christianity, and we refuse to pass on by. We urge you to stop with us for just a moment and lend a helping hand to persecuted Christians through the Cradle Fund. Visit pointofview.net/Cradle Fund or call 1-800-347-5151. Our Middle Eastern family needs us. Stop and give right now. pointofview.net/Cradle Fund and 800-347-5151. Or mail a check with Cradle Fund in the memo to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the Millennial Roundtable, Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. I'm joined today by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, and we've also got Dr. Brent Taylor, who's the pastor at First Baptist Carrollton, Texas, here at Church of the Fields, here in the Dallas area. And so we want to make you aware of just some of the articles that are featured online right now. You can jump on over to pointofview.net to be able to access some of the articles we've been talking about. Everything from the election yesterday to specifically what we've been talking about right now, which is the idea that socialism is on the rise among millennials. And is there more to that number? And we were talking a little bit about that earlier, as well as you can jump over to the Facebook page as well. So you can go to www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. So facebook.com pointofviewradio. And Brent, if they go over there, they can see your face because we've got a live feed that's going right now.
That is really disturbing.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for people who would do that.
Yeah,
but,
so hashtag blessed, right? To be able to see the face of Dr. Brent Taylor. And so we would highly encourage you to go over there, facebook.com, Point of View Radio, as well as to the website, pointofview.net, where we've got our articles featured, as well as some information on the guests, myself and Chelsey and Brent. And so we've been talking about socialism on the rise among millennials. 42% of millennials would choose to live in a capitalistic country. 44% would choose to live in a socialist country. Chelsey was kind of sharing earlier that those numbers aren't necessarily all that they seem to be, that there's a little bit more depth to it. And we're going to take some phone calls as well. And so we're going to jump on over to Mississippi. And we've got Crawford in Mississippi. Are you there?
Yes. Hey, good afternoon.
Hey, Crawford. Whereabouts in Mississippi are you?
We are driving on through back home to New Orleans.
Oh, you're in New Orleans, huh? Okay.
Yes.
Good deal. Good deal.
Get some Cajun food for me, please.
Yeah, I love
Beignets.
it. I love it. So what is your point of view, Crawford?
Yeah, no, I was relating to what y'all said, being maybe sort of overeducated and underemployed in that sort of genre of millennial. I've got 2 master's degrees. I'm a pastor myself, but with the same thing in millennials, you know, maybe our spiritual trends, with the trending with many millennials relating to being more spiritual than religious in that category. Mm-hmm. And many of the mainline Protestant churches on the decline. And so we found ourselves creating a community garden, which is kind of like a guise of our church in a high-needs neighborhood in New Orleans. But I'm the volunteer executive director. So I work for free thanks to my beloved wife who supports me, our untraditional family structure. Again, there's another millennial thing there. Yeah. But yeah, with the socialism thing, I don't know exactly like who defines it, but we base our church community there in the garden off of a verse from the book of Acts, where it says the early church, you know, they shared all things they had in common. And that kind of reminds me of sort of like socialism, you know, where everybody's sort of sharing, like the top and the bottom. There's less of a income inequality between the two. And that's sort of the thing I find so tough about capitalism is the income inequality just continues to grow in our country. And that's what I find so disturbing, I guess, about our capitalistic ways.
Yeah. Crawford, you bring up a really great point. Chelsey, you were saying?
Yes, I think that's such a really, really good point. And the only thing I would say to that is we have to ask the question, whose responsibility is it? Because I would posit to you it's absolutely the church's responsibility to care for their neighbors, to make sure no one in their communities goes hungry, to provide for the needs of one another. I don't think that's the role of our government.
Yeah.
Our government is not our religion. It is not our God. A smaller government actually enables the church to do its job and allows those needs to be met by, I think capitalism fuels that.
Yeah, I think there's the distinction that needs to be made, whether the sharing needs to be government coerced or voluntarily entered into, right? And so a socialistic country or a socialistic system would say that the government coerces you to share, whereas we know from the Christian standpoint, we're compelled by love and not by government coercion, according to 2 Corinthians 5, 14. The passage that Crawford shared is just such a rich passage that my roommates and I try to emulate the Acts 2, 42 through 47, as well as Acts 4, 32 through 35, that they shared and they had things in common. It's this understanding that what's mine is yours and yours is mine. It's better to give than to receive. And I don't need the government to coerce me into that, but I want to be given the opportunity to be able to do that as well. And so there's that distinction that needs to be made. Brent, what were you thinking?
I think your point about it being voluntary is really the critical nature of what was happening in the book of Acts. It was not the government that was coming in. It wasn't even the church that was coming in and saying, you must. It was a voluntary act based on love, a response of the people to what was happening. And yes, there were people, I mean, they didn't sell every single possession that they had. This was a decision that was made to be able to support people who were in need. And I think we have to be able to make the distinction, the distinction between those two forces there, and how we understand what socialism or communism has done in the past versus what the Scripture's teaching in the Book of Acts.
So a book I highly recommend is an individual, Michael Novak, that wrote "The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism," that I think is just one of the premier books that we can point to. It's this understanding that socialism kind of gives the appearance of equality, that we're all sharing kind of equally. But the reality is that some are taxed harder than others, and so there's not really that equality that exists. It's kind of a facade equality, whereas capitalism, or democratic capitalism, of what he would say, is that we're all put on equal playing fields, and we're all given equal opportunities to be able to achieve all that which we are. And one of the interesting things that Novak teases out in his book is he says that there's a political component, there's a philosophical component, and there's a theological component. And I'll quote this from him because I think it's just so, he's just got a way with words. Humans are called to be co-creators with God, bringing forth the potentialities the Creator has hidden. Creation is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, riddles which human intelligence is expected by the Creator to unlock. It's this understanding that we've been given certain gifts and propensities according to 1 Corinthians 12, and that God has crammed heaven into this earth. And it's the job of the Christian, empowered by the Spirit, to be able to work and try to uncover some of that, because of the Genesis 2 call to be co-creators with God. But also with that is also the beauty of being able to bring about His kingdom come, His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that doesn't have to be coerced by a government, but that's compelled by our Creator's love.
Well, I also, and this is maybe a little bit on a separate topic, but think that it's important to note that this might be the result of millennials not living and seeing the catastrophic results of socialism and communism run rampant. So they have this idealistic version of an equal society and kind of what you're describing. And I think that is going to be accomplished by that form of government. I'm going to quote Winston Churchill. Is not quite as poetic, but he said the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. He followed up that comment with saying, but democracy is still the best form of government than any of the others. And so to remember that, I think millennials are living and seeing their reality is maybe the negative implications of capitalism and some of the things that have happened because of capitalism, but not the alternative, which would be the 80s and communism, or even before that. I think communism began about 100 years ago. And so if you really think from a historical perspective, they might not just be as educated on the calamity that happened.
And we see that a lot in the articles about what's happening with millennials as it relates to communism and socialism, is just a misunderstanding of the history of it, of the oppression, the people who have been killed. I mean, it's a misunderstanding of what it is. And it's very easy to look back, to take words and to take an idea of, well, we'll all be together and we'll all work together. It's easy to look back on those with rose-colored glasses, but when you really look back at what has happened with communism, you see why it failed, why it has failed in society, and why the ideas, the principles of it, they just don't work.
Yeah, I think we don't even have to look back. We can just look around right now. You look to what's happening in Venezuela right now, just some of the unrest and just some of the disparity that's happening in Venezuela, especially the uptick of inflation that's going to go upwards of 900%, to where people are just going to be priced out and really going to have to figure out how are they going to survive in such a system. You look at North Korea right now. North Korea has what's known as the Juche system, or the Songbun system, depending upon what you're talking about relative to the caste. And they're trying to perfect kind of socialism to a certain degree. And really what it is it's providing for those that are in the upper caste, but not necessarily taking care of those that are in the lower caste. But then the beauty of a capitalistic system, it allows individuals the opportunity to be able to flex their freedom in such a way that, yes, they can pursue after profit, but also they can use those charitable good works that we know are inherently good and right and beautiful and truthful. And I think that's the beauty of what Jesus has given to us, this opportunity that empowered by the Spirit, because he's given us all things pertaining to life and godliness in order that we can bless others. Because we recognize we have been blessed we've been given every spiritual blessing according to Ephesians 1:3. But also with that, we weren't just blessed to be able to eat our own fruit, but rather we were blessed in order to bless others. That a tree doesn't eat its own fruit, but a tree litters its fruit on the ground for others to be able to come afterward. We're going to continue taking your phone calls, and you can call in at 800-351-1212, and we'll be talking about millennials and socialism as we kind of come back for our last segment. But we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined by Brent Taylor, who's the pastor at First Baptist Carrollton, as well as by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And we've talked about it. We've just run the gamut of issues. We've kind of centered on politics today, talking about everything from reaction from what happened in Virginia last night relative to the Democrats' big wins all through Virginia, as well as New York and Maine, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've been talking about socialism as of the late and trying to better understand millennials' understanding of socialism, how there appears to be just a misconception of what socialism is, but yet a favorability towards that to a certain degree. And it's just really interesting, Chelsey, just this the millennials increasingly, they're the largest voting demographic, but unfortunately they're just not actively engaged in the political process of what we're going to continue to see Among age groups, they are leaps and bounds upwards of 20 points that haven't been able to even register to vote. I think the number was at 55% of millennials were registered to vote as compared to a boomer generation where that number is 74%. So they're expressing some of these beliefs, but they're not necessarily engaged in the political process.
Well, I know, and if we remember voter turnout from 2016, it was abominable for the millennial generation. But I'm always curious if this is a common trend for the age. I mean, and maybe you're a Gen Xer. What were you guys doing at this age? Where did you guys come out in droves to vote?
Well, I really enjoy being the older person on the panel each time we do this, and it makes it sound like back in the covered wagon days.
Back in the days of the Atari and the A-Track. Tell us more, Eagles. I have a peaceful, easy feeling that's coming over me right now.
Those were good years, by the way. I think that there is definitely there was an understanding back in the 80s, for example, 80s and early 90s. There was an understanding that, hey, you're now of age. It's time to register to vote. It's time to be actively engaged in the process. I think now there is, as we've talked about, this anti-establishment attitude that is all over politics, and it's all over the millennial generation as well. So there's less of an interest maybe in being a part, because I think that there's a frustration. What does it matter? Why does it matter if I vote? They're not going to listen to me anyway. They're going to do their own thing. I'm going to instead express my views through social media, different forums. I'm not going to use politics as the way to do that. I do think that will change, though, because it's what drives our government.
Yeah, I think that's one of the frustrating things, Chelsey, that I continue to be just increasingly frustrated about among millennials. It's the sense that they want to protest, but when the time comes for them to actually be able to enact change, i.e. go to the voter's box, that many of them aren't even showing up. I think the numbers was there's 81 million millennials that are eligible to vote right now, and only about 1 in 4 voted, from what we can tell. 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 20 to 25% that voted in the 2016 election. But whenever you saw some of the highlights and the clips on the news in the months afterwards, which you continue to see that millennials were largely representative at these protests, largely representative at these marches. They're willing to go to these particular things. They're willing to voice out on social media, but not necessarily show up at the ballot box.
Right. I think there's a really good explanation for this. I'm going to dust off my old political science degree here. One of the major reasons people come out to vote is what they call efficacy, which is the idea that I really can make a change and impact. And something you alluded to earlier, Brent, is that my vote is going to count. It's important and it matters. It matters to our country. And when you have your voice being heard on so many other mediums through social media and protests, maybe they feel like they're making a difference without actually putting pen to paper and making that difference. And so that disconnect is something that I bet with the continuance of other mediums that we're seeing, that we have to figure out a way to reconnect that.
Yeah, one of the things, and this is probably a soapbox thing, one of the things I'm increasingly frustrated by is we continue, I mean, it's almost like we've been subliminally programmed to believe that Washington's broken, right? Because in every political ad, without fail, the first 5 seconds of that ad says, Washington's broken, send me, right?
Drain the swamp.
Yeah, drain the swamp. You want to create a problem or show a need, and you be the one that's the bright and shining hero to be able to bring remedy to that particular need, and then that's perpetuated. So we're just subliminally believing over the past 20 years that Washington's broken, not necessarily because of the results that are coming out of it, but simply because the advertisements of individuals that want to go there. And so, of course, we're going to believe that nothing's changing in Washington when the very people that we elect to Washington continue to utilize in their campaign material that it's broken. It makes no sense, but there's an opportunity for millennials to be able to engage in that, right, Brent?
I think millennials have to engage because they have things that are very important to them. Mm-hmm. It's a generation that has a lot of strong beliefs, social beliefs, how to meet the needs of people. We talked about that. That's a little bit of what the whole communism discussion is about as well. And we saw such a rise with Bernie Sanders and the campaign rallies, people speaking out. And obviously with the frustrations that people feel who may not support the president right now, they're speaking out at these protests like you talk about. But ultimately in our culture, the way that you do speak out and you speak up is through the ballot box. That's the way that people don't get elected by how many Facebook likes you have. It happens through voting and going to the polls. And so what people are doing today is they're complaining, but they're not acting. They're not doing the things that really can make a difference. if the millennial generation were to really get engaged, if they really were to get involved in politics, we would see a major shift in our country. Not saying it'd be a good shift. I'm not saying it'd be a positive shift. I don't know. We'd have to see what comes of it. But it's a force. But that force is being used on social media where their voice goes out to their friends, to a few people, but it's not making a difference in politics.
Yeah, so that's even one of the ways that the Russians. So I don't know if you saw some of the congressional hearings over the past couple of weeks. They were forced to submit some of the advertisements, and there's one, Aziz Ansari's on one of the advertisements of Parks and Rec and Community, or Parks and Rec rather, and he's holding up a banner or what have you, and it says retweet, and that'll be your vote. And like even the Russians are utilizing this idea that social media is going to be the very thing to be able to enact this change. When in reality, it'll change your friends, it'll change their perception of you, but it really doesn't make any change. And there's so many opportunities for millennials to be able to engage in the process. 1, you can go to the ballot box. 2, you can join a local church. 3, you can join the Kiwanis Club. You can join some Rotary to be able to bring about the change that you so desire. Because again, the beautiful thing about America is you've been given these freedoms, and one of those freedoms, Chelsey, First Liberty, being freedom to assemble, to be able to gather together to address a problem and be the solution. Don't just identify the wrong, but be the right.
That's right. It's not enough to just have head knowledge. And I always say that at my speaking engagements, especially to student groups. I just say, it's great that you sat here and you listen to all of this information, or you get on the internet, or you read all the it's great to have that knowledge and information, but you really have to commit to taking action. You have to commit to spreading that word to others and to being really an advocate for issues you care about.
Yeah.
You mean to say that a hashtag is not enough?
A hashtag is not enough. Maybe that should be a hashtag.
Oh, that's a hashtag is not sufficient.
Copyright Brent Taylor.
Oh, very neat. Very neat. That is so true. I mean, even in the biblical narrative, we could agree with this, right, Brent? Like even Paul writes to the Corinthians and says in 1 Corinthians 8:1 that knowledge just puffs up. It's an extent that not only have we been called to redeem our minds, to be able to renew our minds, but to the extent that we're willing to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. There's an exercising of that knowledge that we have to not just learn a lot, but also be a part of the good, to not grow weary of doing good.
Well, there was an Oklahoma football coach that was asked if football is helping the physical health of the people in our country, and he said absolutely not. The reporter was kind of surprised by it, and he said, look, this is the way I define football. It's 22 men on a football field needing rest, while 50,000 people who need exercise are watching. We have too many people that are sitting on the sidelines and just critiquing. We need more people engaged in the process. That's true for politics. It's true for the church.
Yeah, that is, and what Teddy Roosevelt said, to be the man in the arena. But if I can kind of make it more gender inclusive, to be the person in the arena, the individual that engages in the political sphere, or just in the community sphere, rather. Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining us today. You can find out more about Brent on the website, pointofview.net, as well as Chelsey. Chelsey, thank you so much. First Liberty, we are so grateful that you decided to join us, and be sure to tune back in tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Affirm Films and Sony Pictures Animation present The Star, the fully animated story of the first Christmas, told through a whole new set of eyes. Bo the donkey and his stable of animal friends follow the star to become some unlikely heroes.
That light, that's the star. This is where it's been leading me. What's his name?
His name is Jesus.
The Star, in theaters November 17th. More information is available at thestarmovie.com.
If you were homeless and on the run, all because you love Jesus, would you want Christians to step up and help? Our family in the Middle East, the cradle of our faith, is in desperate need because of ISIS and other persecutors. Point of View urges you to support the Cradle Fund today to help these precious believers. Please give at pointofview.net/Cradle Fund or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/Cradle Fund and 800-347-5151. Or write Cradle Fund in the memo of your check to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to